And welcome, everybody, to the Hanania radio show, brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News, the leading English language newspaper in the Middle East at arabnews.com. This is Season 4, Episode 10. This week here on the Hanania show, we're going to discuss the results of a new YouGov Arab News poll, co-sponsored by Arab News, that looks at Arab American voters and the November 5th, 2024 presidential election. How are they going to vote? What are the issues they face? What's the priority? How important is the Middle East to Arab American voters? Remembering that Arab Americans are not monolithic. They're very diverse, Palestinian, Lebanese, Jordanian being the three largest concentrations of Arab Americans in the United States. So their priorities may be a lot different. Our guests are going to help us analyze the poll, which will be published Tuesday of this coming week. So we're doing it. We get a little insight into what the poll has looked at, and we're going to talk about that insight with two guests, Arab News editor Tarek Ahmad and Al Arabiyya journalist Joseph Haboush. Tarek is the head of the Arab News Research and Studies Unit and is its media editor. Tarek edits and oversees the award-winning long-form deep dives, research reports, and is the host and moderator of the Briefing Room webinar. Notable coverage includes spearheading Arab News coverage of the Lebanon conflict and the 2024 U.S. elections, as well as the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos since 2020. He is also an executive producer of Frankly Speaking, the newspaper's HardTalk-style interview show, which I urge you to watch. He holds an MA in Human Rights Law from SOAS, University of London, and a BA in Media and Communications from the American University of Beirut. You could read all of Tarek's work and see all of his work and watch the Frankly Speaking show on Arab News by visiting arabnews.com. We also, afterwards, will be talking with our second guest, Joseph Haboush. Haboush is the Washington correspondent for Al Arabiyya English, covering U.S. foreign policy and national security from the State Department and Pentagon. He previously worked for the Daily Star and the Telegraph while based in Beirut and was a non-resident scholar at the Washington-based Middle East Institute think tank. He has reported from several countries, including Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, and also from Italy, Georgia, Mexico, and others. It's been a long, difficult conflict that we've seen this past year in Gaza and in the last few weeks in Lebanon. How are these issues going to impact Arab American voters in this election in president? We're going to take a look at that. And, we hope you'll stay tuned. The Ray Hanania Show is broadcast live every Thursday at 5 p.m. on WNZK AM 690 radio and rebroadcast on Monday at 5 p.m. on the U.S. Arab Radio Network in Michigan. It's also available online at arabnews.com/Ray Radio Show. And, of course, you can watch it on Facebook at facebook.com/Arab News. Get more information on myself at arabnews.com or on my personal website at hanania.com. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back to look at the preliminary results that we have from the YouGov Arab News survey poll that was done in the United States in terms of what Arab Americans are going to do in the upcoming presidential election. We'll be right back with our guests right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
Hey, Michigan, let's think beyond the sink and learn where the water your family drinks every day comes from. Private wells and public water supplies allow homes across Michigan to draw water from different sources, like lakes, rivers, and groundwater. Tap into the facts about your home's water source and learn about your home's water quality to protect your family's health. Visit michigan.gov/care4mi drinking water. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most, and make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493. With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600.
And welcome back to the Ray Hanania radio show here on the U.S. Arab Radio Network, sponsored by Arab News on WNZK AM 690 Radio in Michigan, in the Midwest. I'm Ray Hanania. My guest now is Tarek Ali Ahmad. He is the head of the Arab News Research and Studies Unit and its media editor. He edits and oversees the award-winning long-form deep dives, which you see in the paper, research reports, and is the host and moderator of the Briefing Room webinar. Notable coverage includes spearheading Arab news coverage of the Lebanon conflict and the 2024 U.S. elections, as well as the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos since 2020. He's also an executive editor of Frankly Speaking, the newspaper's HardTalk-style interview show, which I urge everybody to go to ArabNews.com and watch when you can. It's a great program. And he holds an MA in Human Rights Law from SOAS, University of London, and a BA in Media and Communications from the American University of Beirut. Got a lot of experience there, Tarek. Thank you for joining us on the radio.
Thank you for having me, Ray. Glad to be here.
So YouGov and Arab News partnered to commission a poll. Tell us a little bit about mainly on the major candidates, because there are third-party candidates, but they're not in every state. It's just the 2 major candidates, and this covers, I believe, Arabs across the country in all 50 states. Tell us a little bit about the poll, and what were the major findings that you saw from the poll results?
Well, Ray, it was actually a very interesting poll and survey, given the heat behind the upcoming elections and everything happening on the outskirts, revolving around it, both in the U.S. and in the Middle East. So the poll that was conducted by YouGov and Arab News essentially revealed that Arab Americans are nearly evenly split in their support for 2 major presidential candidates, which are Donald Trump, where 45% of those surveyed see themselves voting for, while Kamala Harris has 43%. Now, only 4% of the respondents favored third-party candidate Jill Stein, and 6% remain undecided. And those 6% are very key, and they will be the ones essentially deciding this whole election. Now, what was very notable as well is that there is a very record high level of engagement among Arab Americans that intend to vote, with nearly 9 in 10, so 90% intending to vote. This is significantly higher than the participation rates of previous elections. In 2020, we saw 79% head to the polls, and in 2016 we only saw 68%. Now, additionally, there's a lot of demographic differences that emerged within the polling. So we saw a lot of male respondents showing stronger support for Donald Trump at 48% compared to the female respondents at 41%. And older voters, which are 55 years and above and older, are more inclined to support Harris. They're at 49%. So this highlights wide generational divide, as well as generational and demographic divide in candidate preference.
And I mean, just from the standpoint of the two major parties and the third party isn't on every ballot. So a lot of, probably a majority of Arabs really won't have a choice in selecting that. So it does come down to just Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. But that 4% could reflect one region of the country where it might have an impact. Separate, because American politics and elections are so complicated. I don't know if you'd say they're rigged, but they're very complicated. You really have to understand the whole system to understand how it works. The other interesting thing that I found in the poll was that is the Middle East driving this surge in expected turnout from the Arab American community, or is it that there are other issues like domestic issues like the economy and immigration, abortion? Arabs are traditionally conservative, overall, but is that, which side of that is having the most impact, do you think, on the Arab American community?
Yeah, so as you said, there's a lot to juggle with Arab Americans, because you have to remember that they are American at the end of the day, and this is a U.S. presidential election where the key thing to look at is whatever this next U.S. president is going to do internally within the country. But then again, these Arab Americans don't want to lose track or lose their roots back home in the Middle East. So on the larger front, the economy and the cost of living is the foremost concern for these people. So it indicates that economic stability and growth is paramount to these voters. Next in line comes the Palestine-Israeli conflict. Now, this remains obviously a significant issue, particularly given the ongoing war in Gaza, as well as it branching out into Lebanon. So voters are divided, though, in the perceptions of how each candidate would address this specific conflict, given Donald Trump's previous history with the Abraham Accords and Vice President Kamala Harris's tie-in to the current Biden administration. Now, another thing that also is very actually important for these voters is hate speech and discrimination. So concerns about the rising hate speech and discrimination based on ethnicity or religion rank quite highly on the list of issues influencing these voters' decisions. This is particularly resonant given the recent societal trends, and a majority feel that Kamala Harris could be more sensitive to these issues specifically.
And because I was going to ask, is there an issue that could push people from one side to switch to the other side? I mean, is it that fragile? Because it looks like it's a dead heat when you consider the margin of error in any poll. It's pretty close.
It is. So essentially, look, given the reported support levels for Trump at 45% and Harris at 43%, with the margin of error being around 5.93%, it's accurate to say that the race is essentially dead heat, as you said, with the Arab American community. Now, the slight edge for Donald Trump is not statistically significant enough to say that he has that definitive lead.
Right.
But with fluctuations in voter sentiment could easily shift that change of balance as the election approaches. Now, obviously, we're weeks away from the election, so potential for voters to change their minds still is possible, especially if key issues arise that could possibly sway any opinions. However, this survey specifically indicates a strong commitment to these existing choices, which are, as we said, are the economy and cost of living, the Palestine-Israel conflict, as well as the hate speech and the racism within the U.S. Now, many respondents feel secure in these preferences, suggesting that their choices are not weak, but rather solid enough, particularly regarding the economic conditions and safety. Now, if we see any change in how the Biden administration, as well as obviously Vice President Kamala Harris, go on with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, then we may see a shift in choices. But for now, we think not too much is able to change.
So, does a poll suggest that one candidate is a little more sympathetic to the concerns of issues of racism or Islamophobia, that's targeting the Arab community? Because you hear about it, but it doesn't get the same play as, for example, American media reporting on anti-Semitism. That's constantly you hear from both sides. Islamophobia and discrimination against Arab Americans, you don't hear it that much. Do you actually see a difference in that at all?
Not too much. As I said before, Kamala Harris is seen as more sensitive to the hate speech and discrimination within. But if you want to div it into a different thing in terms of looking at what Arab American voters are looking at, because they're trying to balance between domestic policies and foreign policies, because these are going to be things that significantly influence voter choices. So with regards to foreign policy, the Palestinian plight is obviously crucial. There's a notable division in who Arab Americans believe is better to handle the situation. Many of them feel that both candidates are similarly incapable regarding Middle East issues. That's why we don't have a significant amount, but we have a significant enough amount to alter this election, with people veering towards Jill Stein as a third-party candidate, therefore punishing the Democratic administration for the current foreign policy decisions. Now, with regards to domestic policy, these rising crime rates and concerns about illegal immigrations also resonate very strongly within the community. And more than half of those surveyed expressed the desire to tighten the border controls, showing a preference for stricter immigration policies, and reflects a broader national sentiments, which also falls in line with the Donald Trump's Republican position.
Does the poll suggest that there's a soft spot for either candidate, that if they were to do more on something, that it might attract more support maybe from the Arab American voters?
Not. Unfortunately not. It's very, very close. And as I said, with the margin of error being around 6%, the race is really, to quote you, in a dead heat with the Arab American community.
And I noticed, though, as you mentioned, the poll suggests that the Palestine remains the single most important issue, basically attracting concerns of 26% of the respondents, and which I think would kind of put that community in census context, that they may be 26% of the Arab American community. A lot of people forget that Arab Americans are very diverse. They're not monolithic. Probably the biggest community in the U.S. are Lebanese Americans, have been here for generations, really having an impact. Do we see Lebanon playing as big of a role at this point? I know it's early on. Gaza has been going on for a year in Palestine. Lebanon, and terrible things happening in Lebanon. That's only been happening over the last really 3 weeks, I would say. Do we see any indicators in terms of that issue being a major factor in how people will vote?
Now, unfortunately, the poll was done, was sent out to respondents in the first between September 26th and October 1, and we saw really the push and how would you say the increase in violence and in the increased tension and violence increase after October 1st. So we don't have any indication whether or not Lebanon plays a role, but in my view and opinion and expertise, the Lebanon conflict could be seen as even a bigger player than the Gaza conflict, given that Lebanon, being a sovereign state in itself, is a very as you said, there's a lot of close ties to Lebanese American community in the U.S.
Yeah, so basically you're saying that the polling was done before it actually ramped up as violently as it has, that we've seen over the last few weeks. That it's terrible. Another issue, another country is Iran. What's the approach of Arab Americans towards Iran?
Well, actually, the majority of Arab Americans actually found that the whole, there's the metaphor of the carrot and the stick.
Yeah.
So Arab Americans now finally see that it is better to use less stick and more carrot with Iran. Iran's new president has signaled plenty of times that he is open to pushing a better economy for the country. So a majority of Arab Americans see that using diplomacy rather than sanctions and military force with Iran is the better and more productive and efficient way to move forward, as opposed to sticking to ramping up sanctions as well as military force. As we've seen in the past few weeks, Iran is kind of pushed into a corner, and while its president has been making the rounds, telling everyone that they don't want any war, rather they want to open up their economy and they're ready to talk.
So, from the standpoint of Arab Americans, this agitation against Iran really doesn't help. It seems like, as you're pointing out, 41% of those polled favored diplomacy over conflict.
Exactly.
And that must come from the fact that the environment today, there's a war between Russia and Ukraine that we're involved in. There's a war in Gaza that we're involved in, funding it. There's a war that's ramping up in Lebanon. I don't know. It suggests the last thing Arab Americans want to see, and maybe most Americans, is another conflict that the U.S. is driving. They don't want the U.S. to drive that, do they?
Exactly. No, not at all. They'd rather stick to focusing on diplomacy, either through Gulf mediation, as well as making sure that no increase in violence or in conflict occur, because that would essentially drag everyone into places no one wants to get to.
And Arab Americans are American like everybody else. Unfortunately, the mainstream media in the U.S. doesn't concentrate on their interests as much as Arab News does, obviously, and Arabiyya with Joseph Haboush, who we'll be talking with afterwards. So, Tarek, one of the things that I noticed about was that there was a concern among Arab Americans, and I assume Muslims and Christian, on the whole, that 46% of the respondents said that they've been victims of racism, harassment, or hate attacks in the U.S. And how did they view the two candidates in terms of dealing with that increase in harassment in this country when they look at the two candidates?
So essentially, Arab Americans find that Kamala Harris is more sensitive towards their plight and towards any form of racism and hate speech, especially in the rise of, while they feel that a Donald Trump presidency would kind of bring in more ramping up of hate speech and crime and discrimination. But I don't want to give away too much just yet. We're going to pull out the YouGov results shortly, and I want people to get a little bit of a teaser before giving it all away.
Got it. Nope, I got it. And I know that, again, just looking over this, I know that Palestine remains one of the single most important issues, at least for 26% of the respondents. And there were other issues. Are there other domestic issues that concern Arab Americans? I mean, they're American just like everybody else. Are they distracted by the Middle East conflict so much that they can't see the domestic issues? Or did you sense from the polling that they do have concerns about domestic issues like crime, economy, the immigration, or issues like abortion?
Well, as you said, Arab Americans are Americans at the end of the day. That's why economy and cost of living is at the top of their priorities domestically. But they have to they have a sense of obligation towards their homelands, towards their ancestry, to have the Palestine conflict with regards to foreign policy outside. So, as well as looking at hate speech and discrimination. So, on the contrary, Arab Americans have been showing a very solid and confident outlook into internal domestic policy as well as external policy. So, nothing more that the cost of living and economy ranks so high that other domestic issues are not really of any. Are not as notable of a statistic as those two.
Are Arab Americans expecting a resolution to some of the conflicts coming from the U.S.? Do they feel confident that the U.S., regardless of either president, that they can bring about a resolution of some of these conflicts?
Generally speaking, as I said the results showed that a majority of those polled, 40%, consider themselves as Democrat, while 28% consider themselves Republican.
Wow.
Now, they found that Donald Trump was more likely to be the person who would be able to end the Palestine-Israel conflict. However, at the same time, they also find that Donald Trump is closer to the Israeli government than Kamala Harris. So that's kind of a paradoxical in a sense that they find the person that's closer to the aggressor, being Israel, more likely to end the conflict in Palestine. And as this is something that's not surprising, is the fact that 50% of those polled want and find that the best way to solve the Palestine-Israeli conflict is to have a two-state solution, obviously, which is one for Israel, one for Palestine, and a shared governance over the city of Jerusalem. But very surprisingly was 34%, so that's a third of respondents, a little over a third, found that one state where both Palestinians and Israelis living side by side with equal rights see that as the best solution, which we found quite interesting to look at.
Yeah, and final question. I mean, looking at who is good for the Middle East, how Arab Americans, the polls seem to suggest that they both have the same potential to be good, towards the Middle East, bringing about peace, or that they both seem to have the same intention and goal, and that it's shared among Arab Americans. Is there a way to dive down into that a little bit more?
Again, I don't want to give too much away, so I'd rather leave it. I'd rather have people come up to Arab News, check out the YouGov poll, check out the survey. We have great coverage and great analysis on each and everything, so I don't want to give too much away, if that's all right.
No, that's okay. So obviously our show airs Thursday evening. When is the reveal on the poll?
The reveal will come out on Tuesday, and that would be
this coming week.
So
got it.
It's not too far away, and it's only weeks away from the U.S. elections. So much to get out of this poll.
All right, we will be looking forward to that. I want to thank my guest Tarek Ahmad for joining me. He's the head of the Arab News Research and Studies Unit and is its media editor. And you've been editing and overseeing these award-winning long-form deep dives, which are phenomenal research reports, Tarek. So we really appreciate those at Arab News. And of course, everybody, you can go to arabnews.com to follow up on all this and to get more details when the poll results are released in much more detail. Tarek, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Ray, and a pleasure to be on your show as always.
All right. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our guests after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
As the weather gets colder, it's a good idea to layer up with scarves, hats, and mittens. Another layer of protection this season is to get your flu and COVID-19 vaccines. You can get both vaccines at the same time. Talk to your healthcare provider or learn more at michigan.gov/COVID-flu-RSV and layer up for some added peace of mind. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue and Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Ray Hanania radio show here at WNZK AM 690 Radio, broadcasting on the U.S. Arab Radio Network, sponsored by Arab News in Michigan and the Michigan region. My guest is somebody that I've talked to before. He's great insight on Middle East issues. It's Joseph Haboush, who is the Washington correspondent for Al Arabiyya English, covering U.S. foreign policy, national security from the State Department and Pentagon. He previously worked for the Daily Star and the Telegraph while based in Beirut, and was a non-resident scholar at the Washington-based Middle East Institute think tank. He's reported from several Middle East countries, including Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and also from Italy, Georgia, Mexico, and others. Joseph, welcome to the program.
Right, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
So the Arab News, working with YouGov, commissioned a poll to look at the upcoming election that focused mainly on the two major parties, Democrat and Republican, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. When I was able to get you an overview and summary of it, what was the first thing that hit you when you looked over the poll? What was your first reaction to it, to the survey summary?
So I was kind of surprised that the voter turnout was as low as it was in previous years. I didn't realize that, to be honest. So that was probably one of the things that stuck out. And the other issue that didn't surprise me, but was interesting to see, is that the issue of Palestine, the Palestinian issue, is not as prevalent among the Arab American voter as one might think.
And I assume that has to do with two things. One, the Middle East is now the focus in the year before this election, so obviously it's going to dominate. But also, Palestinians are, and the Arab Americans in the U.S., Lebanese are probably the largest and longest based Arab American community. They have their own interests. Obviously, Lebanon now is their focus over the last month, but and Jordanians and Palestinians kind of make up the rest. So that may not be surprising then, right?
Yeah, I mean, born and raised in the U.S., but with Lebanese blood and heritage, it's you're always as a kid, you're kind of immersed in just Lebanese politics, and then you always hear about the Civil War and the role the Palestinians played. Some people casting blame on them, others not. So it's like I said, it's interesting that that it might not be as high of a priority among the Arab American voters as an outsider might think, as anybody outside the Arab American community might think.
Yeah, and I noticed that it was interesting that Arabs, Americans, or the Arab world, we're traditionally conservative, and yet we're very split. It seems, according to the YouGov Arab News poll, almost equally between Trump and Harris. How do you explain that? Is that something that can be easily explained given today's world?
I'll tell you, I mean, it's obviously it's very new. It's a nuanced approach that both sides, the folks that are either vote Republican or vote Democrat. But I mean, I think that's reflective not just of America and people that have immigrated here, but also the Arab community in general. I mean, they're so different. There's just such a diverse makeup, and it's not this one set of beliefs or one color of people. So I guess that's how you would explain the differing opinions and political takes. But I tell you one thing, I'm sorry, I forgot to say that another thing that kind of surprised me was in the poll was how some wanted or some were saying, dealing with the influence of Iranian proxies and other militant groups in the region, and how they what they think the best approach is. And I thought, among the conversations that I've had over the years, and then just kind of in the Arab American community around me, I thought it would be more prevalent or popular for the Arab American to take a more hawkish approach towards these, Iranian proxies and other groups, and the poll kind of said that wasn't 100% accurate.
Yeah, it said, I think it said 41% favored diplomacy over and incentives rather than and even diplomatic pressure over sanctions, which I think the poll said 32%. But
Sure.
It did seem like it was an important issue because only 4%, said that, of course, that they're in favor of the U.S. going to war with Iran. So that's kind of interesting.
And then, I mean, just kind of piggyback off of that, the other part, I think, if I remember correctly, there was 52% of those surveyed that either wanted an increase in U.S. military presence or for them to stay, and which is another interesting element to that. So they want the U.S. to kind of work its diplomatic channels. At the same time, they don't want the U.S. to leave, according to this poll, at least from a military point of view, because I think the belief is that once the military presence is gone, just the overall interest is gone, and then they're left to look to other powers that may not be as influential as they would like.
So regardless of who they favor, Trump or Harris, it seems that, at least according to the poll, 52%, as you note, don't want to see the U.S. leave the Middle East. They want to keep them there, which suggests that they think that the U.S. does play a role that might be positive towards the Middle East future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be great for policymakers here in Washington and other places in the U.S. to have a look at this poll, because it shows how, I think it's reflective of how much people in the region want U.S. involvement, think that it's productive, but at the same time, the policies we've seen towards, Gaza and then now in Lebanon, have, I guess, putting a bit of a dent on the U.S. image abroad. But despite that, you still see folks that want some sort of U.S. involvement.
Well, that kind of, and, you covering the U.S., I think you understand, too, that a lot of people maybe outside the U.S. don't understand that just because people get emotional about candidates individually, it doesn't mean that they get emotional about the broader issues or want change. So, I mean, I think that's interesting that they want to see a continued role of the U.S. in the Middle East. Do you think that has to do with the fact that Israel might be moving further to the right? And maybe, I mean, is there some way to interpret that? Is it a temporal in terms of a reaction, do you think, to Israel, becoming further and further right wing? Maybe the U.S. is the temper factor to kind of bring them back.
I mean, I think the reality of the matter, for better or for worse, is that the U.S. is the only side that's going to be able to, bring these wars to an end, or at least put some sort of pressure on the Israelis, because the Israelis, without going into the last 75 years, just at least the past 12 months or so, they've stated repeatedly that they would have a goal of doing one thing militarily, and then we always see that expand and prolonged. And now I think the fear is we're seeing that in Lebanon. We're continuing to see that in Gaza. So, like I said, the people in the region know. I mean, okay, so you look at Europe. You have European capitals and leaders saying one thing, but they don't have that much leverage. The U.S., on the other hand, does, and I think the military aid is predominantly the main the main lever that they could use one way or another, which until now they haven't really done that.
And now this is an interesting aspect also. This poll was done nationwide. And the Arab American voters are concentrated in maybe about 12 of those 50 states where they really actually have a presence. Only in a couple of those states has the political activism been really strong, like in Michigan. Do you think this poll kind of contradicts what, if someone were just to focus on Michigan alone, in terms of the results that they might get? Because there seems to be this movement towards supporting a third party, the Green Party, as opposed to the two major parties, which dominate almost every election ballot. And the third party, in many cases, isn't even on a lot of ballots, like in Illinois, where I'm at. They've removed the third party, so you can't vote for a third party candidate. You can only vote for Harris or Trump.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I think some Arab Americans, I don't want to say a majority, but I think some would like a third party or a third candidate. I mean, historically, traditionally, yeah, they have played. That third party has had an impact at times, but I think it's just that the chatter you hear about a third party, I think, is just out of frustration that there were again, the reality. I think there was a lot of Arab Americans who would vote Democrat that thought the Democratic administration would be better, particularly for those that care more about the Palestinian issue. And I think they had a rude awakening. On the other hand, the people that had made up their mind to vote that way, I think, just won't vote for Trump regardless. Now, that being said, and forgive me, I forget his name, but there's a very influential, pretty powerful figure, Yemeni. I think I want to say in Michigan yesterday, he endorsed Donald Trump, which was a big
that one mayor in one of the suburbs of Michigan. Yeah. And his base though is predominantly Chaldean.
Sure.
And Chaldeans don't consider themselves Arab. They're Middle Eastern. And then if you say Arab, they get really upset. Yeah, and they're very conservative, the Chaldeans, compared to Arab Christians and Arab Muslims, I think. Yeah,
but I think, is he Chaldean?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think he's Muslim. But you're right. He's a conservative.
I was actually meeting with somebody that knows. I don't know him personally. I met somebody yesterday that knows him, and they were surprised. They were shocked that he endorsed Donald Trump. So I think that's just, again, I think it's 50-50. I mean,
unpredictability.
100%.
You think the unpredictability factor is important in the Arab community, because sometimes we get driven by emotion, and then at some point we have to stop and then make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe,
I do. I mean, look, again, not to focus it all on Iran, but I know a lot of Arab Americans. I mean, I'm one, and like you said earlier, there is, if you look domestically, the voter base would traditionally align with the Conservative Party on a number of things, from reproductive rights to a number of other cultural issues. But then even when you look at foreign policy, like I said earlier, I think a lot prefer this more hawkish approach. Now, the poll says a little bit otherwise. But and so I think the unpredictable. But then you have a big part of the Arab American community. I think a lot of the younger generation as well that have been very vocal on social media, particularly after the Gaza war, now Lebanon. And I think a lot of them will be first-time voters as well. So it's difficult to gauge. And then all that being said, you have another group that just may not participate in these surveys or other polls that you see in other outlets. So I think, again, it's up for grabs. And you've seen a Trump, you've seen J.D. Vance, you've seen Kamala, you've seen Tim Walz. They're focusing a lot more on these Arab American communities as I think we're inside the 25-day timeline for the elections. So they know that the Arab Americans will play an important role. They're trying to go after those few that haven't decided, or maybe they're up in the air.
And, when we look at the polling, obviously you and I both know that polling just kind of looks at a slice of the voter base, and it changes rapidly. Do you think that this is a case, because some of the results were a little surprising based on what we've heard, but the mainstream American news media doesn't really cover the Arab American community very well. So what may sound surprising, in fact, is right in front of our face, but nobody's reporting it other than Al Arabiyya, Arab News, Middle East outlets are covering these issues. But does that have a factor, do you think, in terms of, how Arab Americans vote, the fact that they're kind of marginalized their issues, their concerns by the mainstream media. Do you first of all, do you agree with that? I mean, maybe you don't, maybe you think they do cover the Arab community. From my standpoint, I don't think they do cover them enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you on that. I don't think they care. They cover the Arab American community in great detail. I think they just cover it when it fits into some sort of narrative. You never see, only when it's in the news, only when there's a war in the Middle East, you see coverage on Arab Americans. You don't see the productive role that they've played generation after generation in this country, and a number of factors play into that. But I think one of the biggest factors is that at the end of the day, I'm just not sure. I'm not convinced that the American voter in general, I mean, your milkman in Milwaukee, I mean, foreign policy, he doesn't care. She doesn't care about foreign policy. And that's not a fault of theirs. They're
Right.
more focused on things closer to home, economic issues, other issues that, like I said, hit closer to home.
Yeah, and that if the mainstream U.S. media isn't focusing on it, when they do focus on it, as you point out, and I agree with you, they kind of tend to go for the flashpoints, the loudest voices. They're not talking about the whole community. Maybe is that why we may see this skewered focus on? There's so much emphasis on a third party that the Arabs are not going to support the major candidates, according to reporting in the mainstream media. But when the Arab media gets involved and looks at it and reaches the Arab community, we see a little bit different, that they're focused mainly on Trump and Harris. Is that possibly a reason why we don't hear too much about a third party candidate in this poll?
The short answer is I'm not sure. I'm just not. But I think I don't think the at least the media landscape here, the mainstream media, they don't understand the diversity of the Arab American community, and I think that's just a trickle effect in terms of how they cover the Arab American community, when they cover them, when they do, what is it that they cover, and for decades, the Arab American has just been portrayed as, I think, a victim of war and conflict, immigration. So when they come over here, it's just talking about what forced them to flee. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. What forced them to flee their home country or their native lands, and then as opposed to, okay, well, they are here. What role are they playing? So yeah.
Yeah, YouGov has done a great job of kind of tapping. You don't see too many focuses on Arab Americans, so it's always good to see someone at least paying attention to us, other than yourself. Al Arabiyya, which does a great job, Arab News, several of the other publications. When you step back, given what you've seen covering, the Arab American, Middle East community and the issues that have to do with the Middle East, what do you see happening in U.S. foreign policy? I mean, what direction are we headed, do you think?
I think, I think it obviously depends on November 5th, where we go. I think the more, the more horrendous images and videos we see on social media, the more pressure there is on the Biden administration, besides being a lame duck administration, the more pressure there is on him to do something. I think you saw that yesterday with the letter that went out from, the Secretary of State, Defense Secretary. That being said, they've had a year. Yesterday I was talking to a pretty senior, U.S. official, and we were talking about this, kind of off the record, just what could be done, what can the U.S. do, and they were quite frank with me. They said there was an opportunity for Biden and other officials in this administration to come up with a solution early on. That window passed, and then things got worse. I think the situation in Lebanon will be, unfortunately, I think it'll be similar to that of Gaza. I'm not saying it'll be reduced to rubble the way Gaza was, although it could be. But I think a lack of any type of U.S. movement is going to lead the region into further conflict, further instability. And I hear that from diplomats from Europe and across the Arab world as well. It's just unclear what the U.S. stance is. You know, a lot of these officials and diplomats that I speak to will tell you, you know, we want to support the U.S., but let them tell us what it is that they want, because it's unclear. And so I think, you know, all that, you know, just kind of went down a rabbit hole. But I think if we see a Harris-Walz administration, I think we'll see a little bit of this, pretty much the same as we will with the Biden administration. You may see one or two weapon shipments withheld here or there, but overall, I don't think policy is going to change. If there's a Trump administration, a J.D. Vance administration, I think it'll go. I don't think the status quo will remain. I don't know which way it'll go, but I think he will shift it one way or the other. I think he has leverage. He has just as much leverage as Biden does, but I think he'll use it again, one way or the other. I'm not sure which way, but I don't see, at least from best case, I think by January, we still see this fighting going on in both Gaza and Lebanon if it hasn't expanded. And I think people are waiting now for a potential Israeli response to an Iranian attack. The Iranians have vowed to, you know, respond to that response. So we're just in a dangerous cycle here, and the absence of a powerful U.S. administration, I think, is playing a big role in this.
Yeah, clearly that when you look at this poll, it suggests the Arab American community is divided, which means they're kind of neutralized in this election. That the election is going to be decided by other factors. It's not going to be decided by the Arab American community. It won't be decided by the Middle East. That's what it might suggest. What do you think are the two issues? Just maybe a final look at the two candidates. Do you see any issues that are really driving this election? Not just the Middle East, but domestic issues, the fear of conflict. There are conflicts in, obviously in Europe between Russia and Ukraine that's been ongoing now 3 years. This Middle East conflict. What do you think is a factor that is really impacting voters overall?
I tell you, I think it's the economy, and I think the border crisis. I do. I mean, abortion's a big part of this, but I'm not sure that there's anybody that's going to change their mind on the candidate based on their view on abortion. I mean, they've already made up their mind. On the economy, you have over the past couple of years, you've had people, and even now they say that the situation was better under Donald Trump. Inflation and other things. Then you have some economists kind of going back against that, and then you have the Democrats. So, but I still think it's up in the air as to some people questioning which might be better. I think the other issue is the border crisis, which the Biden administration has failed to address or do anything really to mitigate, other than these past couple months when the election started getting closer. So I think for the average American voter, it's the economy and the border crisis. Despite Arab Americans thinking that the Middle East is a big issue, I just don't think that's the case. Among Arab American voters, sure it is, but among the average American voter, I just don't think so. And I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference in the outcome of the election.
Yeah, I think you're right. Arab Americans are part of the American fabric here, but they're also impacted by those two issues, the economy and immigration. And I tend to agree with you that those two issues are probably driving, among a few others, and the Middle East is not as big of an issue with mainstream voters as they are with Arab Americans. Any other points or comments that you think, observations you want to make?
Yeah, I think an important thing to remember is a big part of the Arab American community was disappointed with Kamala Harris at the DNC when they weren't allowed to speak, because from what I've heard, they had a speech that had already been vetted pretty carefully by the Harris campaign and the team. So I think that's something that they haven't forgotten, and it might negatively impact her when November 5th comes around.
I know that President Biden started out with his partnership with the Arab community, wanted to work with them. What do you think that's one reason why Harris isn't doing as well as Democrats expected them to do? That the follow-up from that wasn't very great. The DNC not including, on Arab American Voice to speak, whether they agreed with it or not. It was kind of surprising to me that they wouldn't even allow that. Do you think those are factors that are playing and, maybe even hurting Harris a little bit?
Of course. Yeah, I think it's definitely hurt her. But I think it's also similar to the President Biden's approach that he's taken since last October, that, some days he's harsh on the Israelis, other days he's harsh on the Palestinians. There's not really a consistent approach to this. And I think it's the same with Harris. I mean, you've seen her come out with statements after certain terrorist attacks. She'll come out with a strong worded statement in support of Israel, and then the next day she'll flip. So I think that's impacted because the Arab Americans that were looking to the Democrats are now saying, well, where exactly do you stand?
My guest, Joseph Haboush, Washington correspondent for Al Arabiyya English. Joe, we really always appreciate you joining us and talking to us and giving us your insight to help us understand what's happening in the world and commenting on the YouGov Arab News poll. Thank you so much, Joe.
Right, thank you. Your show is always great to listen to.
Thank you, buddy. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bonham, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
Thank you for listening to the Ray Hanania Radio Show, brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News, the leading English language newspaper in the Middle East at ArabNews.com. This season, the Ray Hanania Radio Show focuses on the U.S. presidential elections, the battle between the major party candidates, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, and the third party contenders who could push the election into the House, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Jill Stein. We'll be back next Thursday with more special guests to help us understand the role Arab and Muslim voters in America are playing in the presidential election. Check out our page at arabnews.com/Ray Radio Show for all of the programs that we've recorded and all of the story links that have been written about the program. And also you can go to my website at Hanania.com, Hanania, Hanania.com for my columns, my radio shows, my podcasts, and all my writing at Arab News. Have a great week, everybody. See you next Thursday. Good evening.